Hello, I am Engineer Mugoro Wairimo, an active mobility associate at ITDP based in Nairobi. I'll be making a presentation on the principles of transit-oriented development. So this is what we call inclusive transit-oriented development, and inclusive transit-oriented development is about linking land use policies to transport investments, which aims in improving access to schools, to work, to recreation facilities. So that way then transit-oriented developments are made based on guided by the land use that is in the area. And this is an example of what Moi Avenue would look like when the BRT is implemented. So as we said, in transit-oriented development, we have the transport system and the build form being well linked, and then that has a direct impact, or that impact on the transport mode choices made in that area. So when you link the land use to the transport system, then it really has a huge impact, and it impacts a lot on how the residents in that area make their transport mode choices. As earlier indicated, that transit development needs to complement the land use of the existing area. However, the fact that you're adjacent to transit doesn't mean that it is transit oriented. This is a good example in Johannesburg, where we have a huge residential area, a huge development right next to a BRT corridor, and in fact right next to a station, one of the stations in that corridor. But when you look at how the infrastructure has been done, it does not allow residents who could be in that area to cross the road to the BRT station. So this is adjacent to transit, but it is not transit oriented. So when it comes to transit oriented development, we have 8 principles, and these principles are where correct form of urban development supports and prioritizes sustainable and equitable and inclusive transportation. So that means that we have compact, we have mixed use. When we have developments incorporating mixed use, it means that then people can manage to reside in the areas where they do their shopping, or in areas where they work. And then we also have transit, which is an important principle of TOD. We have cycling, we have walking, we have densifying, and we have connecting. So in transit oriented development, what is usually prioritized is sustainable mobility, and also not just sustainable mobility, but sustainable mobility which is equitable and inclusive to all residents. So again, one of the principles is transit. When it comes to transit, then it's about the provision of a sustainable, equitable, and inclusive public transport for public. A good example is Dar es Salaam, which has a good transit system that is shown on the slide in BRT. So it's about public transport is about ensuring that we have provided sustainable and equitable transport for the public. And what are the characteristics of good public transport? It has new high capacity buses. It has enclosed and secure stations that the commuters who intend to use the public transport pay before they board. So it has pre-boarding payment, which is done using smart cards. We have rapid boarding. That means that the platforms on which the commuters are boarding into the buses are at the same level with the buses. So that means it allows for rapid boarding. We have dedicated bus lanes for the public transport, and we also have pedestrian and cycle access. So this is an example of good provision of good public transport. When we think about public transport, what it does is it allows us to use road space efficiently. For instance, this is a good example where we have a 3-lane carriageway with 3 lanes on either side. When you look at the capacity of passengers it can ferry per hour, it is 3,000 passengers per hour and per direction. Should we make an improvement to the 3-lane carriageway by adding an elevated road with 2 lanes on either direction? What that does is that it increases the capacity of the 3-lane carriageway from 3,000 to 4,700 passengers per hour per direction. But if the improvement that was made on the 3-lane carriageway was the provision of dedicated lanes for bus transit, then with a high BRT system, we can end up moving about 12,000 to even 45,000 passengers per hour per direction, based on whether the quality of the BRT system implemented is high capacity or high quality or not. What we're saying is that improving the road in a way that we implement dedicated lanes for public transit, what that does is that it enables us to use road space efficiently. This is a good example of Dar es Salaam. We have adequate space for the footpath, which is used by pedestrians on that corridor. We have a cycle track that is provided. We also have adequate space for that. We have public transport lanes that are exclusive to BRT buses, and we have the mixed traffic. This is how we efficiently use road space, by making sure that we have adequately provided for transit, we have adequately provided for walking and cycling along the corridor. Another principle of TOD is walk. Again, when we think about walking, when we think in terms of public transit, we have the people who commute are the same people who need to cover their last mile by walking. So what footpath design is the best? Again, it incorporates the zone system. We have a frontage zone, which is a buffer between the developments and the area where the footpaths are, on the area of the footpaths where the pedestrians used to walk. We have the pedestrian zone, which needs to have adequate clear width for free movement of the pedestrians. It should have no obstructions and it should allow for universal access. And we have the furniture zone, where we have trees, we have street lighting, we have utility boxes provided on that zone, so that then the same is not being placed on the pedestrian zone, obstructing movement. We have safe crossings. When we think about pedestrians, footpaths, we need to also allow for the safe crossing by pedestrians from one side to another. And this is a beautiful example in Dar es Salaam of a safe crossing provided. It is a raised crossing and it is provided on a BRT corridor, and it allows, and it is also universally accessible. So, as said, in transit-oriented development, one of the other important parts is having permeable frontages along high-capacity rapid transit systems, as shown in the slide before. Being adjacent to rapid transit does not necessarily mean transit-oriented. For it to be transit-oriented, we need to ensure that we have permeable frontages, that the developments, people who are in the developments around the mass rapid transit corridor can easily access the corridor by crossing the road, as shown here, as shown on the slide, on this particular slide. So again, permeable frontages along high capacity rapid transit. We have multiple and shop and building entrances at ground level, and that shows that that area has a lot of activity. And also, when we have permeable frontages, what they do, they make the streets much safer, and they make the streets lively and more livable, as opposed to when the developments along the rapid transit systems are turning their backs towards the system. Another principle of TOD is cycling. So this again, as said, the cycle track needs to be located between the carriageway and the footpath, and it needs to be well raised to the level of the footpath as illustrated on this slide. So what are the standards of constructing a good cycle track? In this slide, we have an illustration from Dar es Salaam, and a good cycle track is physically separated from mixed traffic. A good cycle track has a minimum clear width of 2 meters and is made of smooth surface material for cyclists to use it comfortably. And a good cycle track needs to have a wide and adjacent footpath right next to it to prevent conflict between cyclists and pedestrians who are using the corridor. So this is how good cycle tracks need to be constructed. And as we said, footpaths and cycle tracks help complement the public transport system since commuters are able to use them for their last mile access. This is an illustration of a cycle track in Mombasa, Kenya. As you can see, we have cyclists and we also have a boda operator who is riding the cycle track. So the problem with this cycle track is one, it's not physically separated from the motorized traffic, and that is why a boda operator is able to use it. And when we have that mix between the motorized traffic and the NMT, it makes it very unsafe for NMT users. So this is one of the ways we're not supposed to construct cycle tracks. This is an example of a good cycle track, and complete and safe cycling is ensured by creating separate cycling tracks and providing a complete network of the cycle tracks and ensuring that they are made of smooth surfaces such that their cyclists are able to use them comfortably, and also ensuring that we have secure cycle parking so that when the cyclists need to park their cycles, they can do that without any issues. Connect is another principle of transit-oriented development. From this slide, we are able to see on the left a network design which is done in a car-oriented manner, which is network design which is done to prioritize connectivity of the routes or the corridors used by cars. And we have the one on the right showing a people-oriented or a planned network design. And a planned network design helps usually consists of a dense network of direct short paths which are easily accessible by NMT users to improve accessibility. So this is what we mean by a good and a people-oriented network design. Prioritized connectivity is ideally should be done on NMT networks, and that is usually meant to encourage sustainable mobility. When the shortest routes to a certain area are covered easily by walking and cycling, then you'll notice more people adopting to walk and cycle other than to use vehicles. And that's what we call prioritized connectivity. This is a good example of a pedestrian path that cuts across a huge block around Serena Down Hotel downtown in Dar es Salaam, where then, as you're saying, as the shorter we have dense network of short paths which can easily be used by pedestrians and by cyclists. Connect means dense networks of streets and paths, and walking and cycling routes ideally should be shorter than the motor vehicle roads.